A chill ran down my spine as I watched the video. It was like something out of a nightmare. Young Israeli soldiers, some barely old enough to be called women, paraded in front of a cheering crowd, their faces etched with fear, their eyes betraying the horror they must have felt. This wasn't just a display of victory, it was a spectacle of cruelty, a calculated act designed to humiliate and intimidate. The images broadcast by Hamas on October 7th sent shockwaves across the world. They showed the brutal reality of the ongoing conflict, stripping away any pretense of civility or restraint. The world watched in horror, wondering how such barbarity was possible in the 21st century. The video served as a stark reminder of the human cost of this intractable conflict. It forced us to confront the raw emotions, the fear and the desperation that lie at the heart of this seemingly endless struggle. And it left us with a profound sense of unease, a feeling that things had just gotten a whole lot worse. The decision to parade captured soldiers, especially young women, was not a random act of cruelty. It was a deliberate strategy, carefully calculated to achieve several goals. First, it aimed to demoralize the Israeli public, to sow fear and doubt in their minds. By showing that even their sons and daughters were vulnerable, Hamas sought to erode the Israeli people's resolve. Secondly, the video was intended to inflame passions in the Arab world. By portraying Israel as a brutal force capable of unspeakable acts, Hamas sought to rally support for its cause. The timing of the video, coming just days after a major offensive, was no coincidence. Thirdly, the video was a blatant attempt to provoke a disproportionate response from Israel. Hamas knew that the images would outrage the Israeli public and pressure their government to retaliate with overwhelming force. This, in turn, would play into Hamas's narrative of Israeli aggression and further inflame tensions in the region. The video was a masterclass in propaganda, a cynical exploitation of human suffering for political gain. It demonstrated the depths to which Hamas was willing to sink in its pursuit of power and the challenges involved in finding a peaceful solution to the conflict. The international community reacted with swift and unanimous condemnation. Leaders from across the political spectrum expressed their disgust at the video, calling it a violation of international law and basic human decency. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting where member states condemned the act and called for the immediate release of the hostages. The United States, Israel's closest ally, condemned the video in the strongest possible terms. President Biden called it an act of barbarism and demanded the immediate release of the hostages. He reiterated the United States' unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself, but urged restraint in its response. Even countries traditionally sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, such as Turkey and Qatar, expressed their unease at the video. They called for the humane treatment of prisoners and urged Hamas to adhere to international conventions. The widespread condemnation underscored the gravity of the act and the damage it had inflicted on Hamas's international standing. The video served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the region and the need for a negotiated settlement. It underscored the urgent need for the international community to come together and find a lasting solution to this decades-old conflict. Beyond the political posturing and diplomatic maneuvering, it's crucial to remember the human beings at the heart of this tragedy. The young soldiers, ripped from their families and thrust into a nightmare, represent the countless victims of this endless cycle of violence. Their faces, etched with fear and uncertainty, serve as a poignant reminder of the true cost of war. One can only imagine the anguish of their families, glued to their television screens, desperately searching for any news of their loved ones. The agonizing weight, the uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, it's a burden no family should have to bear. The video also highlighted the plight of Palestinian civilians caught in the crossfire. The images of bombed-out buildings and wounded children serve as a stark reminder that war leaves no victors, only victims. The conflict has exacted a heavy toll on both sides, leaving a legacy of pain, suffering, and resentment. The human cost of this conflict is immeasurable, measured in shattered lives, broken families, and lost potential. It's a stark reminder that peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice, equality, and opportunity for all. The events of October 7th have cast a dark shadow over the already dim prospects for peace in the region. The trust deficit between Israelis and Palestinians has reached an all-time low, making meaningful dialogue nearly impossible. The cycle of violence, fueled by hatred, mistrust, and despair, seems to have taken on a life of its own. Yet even in the darkest of times, hope flickers. The international community must seize this opportunity to redouble its efforts to broker a lasting peace. This requires addressing the root causes of the conflict, including the occupation, the settlements, and the denial of Palestinian statehood. It also requires holding all parties accountable for their actions, condemning violence on both sides, and working to create an environment conducive to dialogue and reconciliation. The road to peace is long and arduous, but it is a journey we must take. The alternative is unthinkable: another generation condemned to a life of violence and despair. Another chapter in this seemingly endless saga of pain and suffering. The time for action is now. The future of Israelis and Palestinians alike hangs in the balance.